Now, anti-government demonstrators have taken to the streets of the Armenian capital, Yerevan, for a third day to protest against the government's handling of the crisis in Nagorno-Karabakh. Demonstrators say the government has made too many concessions to Azerbaijan and are demanding their prime minister resign. Ethnic Armenian separatists in the Nagorno-Karabakh region agreed to dismantle their forces on Thursday following a 24-hour military offensive by Azerbaijan.
Crowds of ethnic Armenians gathered at the base of Russian peacekeepers in the city of Stepanakert. Russia said over 1,000 people were there. It said its peacekeepers helped Armenians get from several villages to Stepanakert, where they took shelter as they waited to be evacuated from the enclave, while gunfire reportedly rang out around them despite the ceasefire. I just left the house without anything. I simply left, and I don't know what will happen to us. A communication blackout left many cut off from information on where to go and unable to reach family members. Meanwhile, Armenia's capital Yerevan marked a somber Independence Day as its prime minister gave an address that triggered a third day of protests.
In Armenia, we'd made preparations to host around 40,000 families. We didn't want to announce it. Why not? I'll be honest. It's because we think Armenians in Nagorno-Karabakh should live in their homes, in their homeland, under conditions that ensure a dignified and danger-free life. At the moment, we believe that there is no direct threat to people in Nagorno-Karabakh.
Earlier protests in front of Russia's embassy had also taken aim at its peacekeeping shortcomings.
You have no business being here in Armenia.
With the only link between Armenia and Nagorno-Karabakh, the Lachin corridor reportedly closed, Pashinyan insists that ongoing peace negotiations should focus on the rights of ethnic Armenians. But mistrust runs deep. As the first day of peace talks concluded, many Armenians said they were still waiting for a way out of the enclave.
More on this. Let's bring in Elisa de Cabernel. She's the Deputy Program Director for Europe and Central Asia at the International Crisis Group. She joins us from London. Elisa, Azerbaijan now claims full control of that breakaway region, Nagorno-Karabakh. What will happen, do you think, to ethnic Armenians living there?
Well, that's the most critical question right now, is how Baku manages the situation in its talks with the local communities and ethnic Armenians there. There's a whole lot of fear and mistrust. There are questions over what happens to people who fought in the war in 2020 or even decades ago in the 1990s war that saw the region set up its own institutions and its own security forces. So it's really crucial that their concerns are taken into account and that there's humanitarian aid that flows to the region and that there's a real dialogue with Baku on these questions.
Just to press that a little further, as you say, there's a lot of fear right now. Armenia's prime minister insists there's no direct threat to the civilian population of Nagorno-Karabakh, but is that really the case? Are they really safe?
So, I mean, the region itself has basically been under an effective blockade for 9 months now. So there are shortages of medicine, of food, of fuel supplies. So residents there, even before this military operation began, were facing a really dire humanitarian situation that had, sparked calls from international actors to allow convoys in and for Baku to do more. So they have already been really fearful of what might come next. Pashinyan is trying to, the Armenian prime minister is trying to distance himself to a certain extent from the situation. Armenia and Azerbaijan have been involved in their own separate peace talks for for months now, facilitated by Moscow and Brussels and DC. So I think he's really trying to manage the situation in which Armenia also itself feels very vulnerable.
What about Russia? Armenia relied on Russian peacekeepers to maintain order and protect civilians in Nagorno-Karabakh. What role is Russia playing there now?
So Russia really wasn't able or wasn't willing to do much to deter Baku in this situation. Moscow, in fact, said it only got minutes' notice before the military offensive. At the moment, peacekeepers are playing a role. I mean, they helped broker this, what has been called a ceasefire, and is really resembles more of an effective surrender by local forces in Nagorno-Karabakh. But they are playing a role in terms of helping civilians there. We see thousands of people crowding around their peacekeeping base, uncertain what comes next, looking for help, looking for aid. So they are an important actor on the ground, but it's unclear how long they will stay there and what role precisely they will play in helping to manage the situation now with Azerbaijan asserting control and people on the ground very afraid of what comes next.
And DW's Maria Katamaza is covering this story from the Armenian capital, Yerevan. Earlier, I asked her how people are there reacting to this week's events.
Sarah, we are currently right next to the government building here in Yerevan, where the protesters have been gathering since the early morning. Currently, the emergency meeting is being held by the Prime Minister, Nikol Pashinyan, and just right under the windows, the protesters are chanting, "Nikola, you are a traitor. Nikola, you are our enemy." That's what they're saying. That's actually reflects the mood of Armenians here in Yerevan, most of them that we met here, who are very angry, upset with their government. They're saying that the Prime Minister did not do enough to protect ethnic Armenians in Nagorno-Karabakh. And yes, very gloomy mood and very much of desperation and much of anger we are seeing now.
And how about the situation on the ground in Nagorno-Karabakh itself? What is the status of the ceasefire there?
Yes, sir. So we are hearing some reports from Nagorno-Karabakh, and it seems the situation seems to have stabilized, and it's relatively calm now. Obviously, people are still lacking food and water. There were some reports that from Azerbaijani media that Baku is sending humanitarian aid and the cargo is now underway. However, we have not seen anything as of now that reached Nagorno-Karabakh, and it's a very dire situation there. People are still in the shelters, and thousands, as mentioned in the report, are already evacuated to the Stepanakert airport, and people are just waiting for the local separatist authorities to announce further steps, and yeah, very frightened and very terrified, looking forward for the news and instructions.
What lies ahead for the ethnic Armenians living in Nagorno-Karabakh?
Well, Sarah, if we look at official statements, for instance, Nikol Pashinyan, Prime Minister, today stated that there is no danger to ethnic Armenians in Nagorno-Karabakh, and that Nagorno-Karabakh Azerbaijani authorities should ensure their safety and guarantees, and people should stay in their homes. But there are some conflicting statements from the officials as well here in Yerevan. For instance, the foreign minister is saying that Azerbaijani intends to carry out the ethnic cleansing. So it's quite still very unclear what's going to happen when Azerbaijan took the full control of the territory, and what's going to happen to ethnic Armenians, especially men who fought in the wars for the past decades.
Maria Katamaza joining us from Yerevan. We appreciate it.